Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you find yourself in Petrograd, 1917, a city hushed under low clouds and dim street lamps, where cold air drifts in from the river and footsteps echo off stone. The Winter Palace looms nearby, vast and pale in the darkness. You're not a leader or a figure remembered by name, just an ordinary Bolshevik, one among many, moving through a night that will later be called historic. Before we begin, just a quiet note. If you'd like to know when more stories like this drop, don't forget to follow the show. If you'd prefer these episodes without ads, the Patreon is linked in the description. And if you want to feel a little more immersed, a pair of wireless earbuds can help. I've linked the ones I use, along with a few other sleep tools, below. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. Evening lowers itself gently over Petrograd, not with ceremony, but with a gradual softening of edges. You walk along streets that have given up the last of their daytime warmth, the stones beneath your boots holding a lingering chill that seeps upward through the soles. The sky is dim but not yet dark, a washed-out blue-grey that feels stretched thin above the rooftops. Lamps flicker on one by one, their light unsteady, as if unsure whether it is needed yet. Somewhere nearby, the Neva moves slowly, breathing out a cold, damp air that drifts inland and mixes with the smell of coal smoke and old brick. You pull your coat closer, not out of urgency, but habit, and continue forward at an unhurried pace, carried by the same quiet momentum as everyone else on the street. The city feels alert without being loud. There are fewer voices than usual, fewer carts, fewer reasons to stop and talk. People move with purpose, but without haste, eyes forward, shoulders slightly hunched. You pass shop fronts already darkened for the night, their windows reflecting shapes more than faces. Bread smells faintly from somewhere behind a closed door, a reminder of ordinary routines continuing even now. Yet something sits beneath it all, an unspoken awareness shared by everyone you pass. Rumours have been circulating for days, slipping from mouth to ear in stairwells and factory yards, changing shape as they travel. Tonight they feel heavier, settling into the air like the fog that curls along the riverbanks. No one names them aloud, but you sense them all of the same, pressing gently against thought, impossible to ignore. You are one of many, and that anonymity brings a strange comfort. Your coat is worn, your hands rough from work, your breath visible when you pause for a moment at a corner. Nothing about you stands out, and nothing needs to. You are not here to be seen, only to move when movement is required. Somewhere behind you, boots scrape against stone, falling into step for a while before drifting away again. The sound blends into the city's low murmur, distant whistles, a door closing, the muted clatter of metal far off near the rail lines. Each noise feels softened, as if wrapped in cloth, leaving space between moments where silence stretches comfortably. As you walk, you notice how tired the city looks. Grand buildings along the wider streets rise up with familiar weight, their facades darkened by soot and age. They have watched seasons pass without comment. Emperors come and go, crowds gather and disperse. Tonight they seem especially still, as if conserving energy. You pass beneath tall windows that reflect nothing but dim sky and shadow. Somewhere above, a light burns steadily, unmoving, and you wonder who sits there, what thoughts fill the room, whether they feel the same quiet tension or remain untouched by it. The thought drifts away, without resolution, replaced by the steady rhythm of your steps. Your mind wanders in slow circles, never settling on one idea for long. You think of conversations half finished, of instructions hinted at but not fully spoken. Words like soon and ready and tonight have been used often, yet without detail. That uncertainty no longer feels sharp. Instead, it is dulled into something familiar, like an ache you have learned to carry without complaint. You focus instead on small sensations. the way your breath warms the scarf at your throat, the slight stiffness in your fingers, the way your shoulders relax when you consciously let them drop. There is no rush now. Whatever is meant to happen will arrive in its own time. And until then, there is only this walk, this evening, this shared stillness. Near the river, the fog thickens, blurring the edges of lampposts and softening their glow. The water itself is barely visible, more presence than sight, but you hear it moving slowly, persistently, indifferent to the city's moods. You pause for a moment, not because you must, but because it feels right to stand and breathe. The air smells damp and cold, layered with smoke and something faintly metallic. It fills your lungs and leaves you grounded, anchored in the present. You are aware of others nearby doing the same thing, stopping briefly, looking out without really looking, then continuing on. When you resume walking, your path bends toward narrower streets, where buildings lean closer together and the light thins. Here, voices are rarer, footsteps more noticeable. You hear your own boots clearly now, each step measured and unremarkable. A cat slips along a wall and disappears into shadow. Somewhere above, a window creaks open then shuts again. Life continues in small contained motions, untouched by whatever larger story may be unfolding. You feel no surge of excitement, no sense of standing on the edge of something grand. What you feel instead is a steady calm, edged with weariness, the kind that comes from long days and longer waiting. As the evening deepens, the sky darkens almost without you noticing. The lamps feel brighter now, their halos larger in the fog. You adjust your pace to match the quiet flow around you, neither leading nor following. There is comfort in that balance, in being part of a movement that does not announce itself. You think briefly of how history is often described in sharp lines and bold moments, then let the thought fade. From where you are, the city does not feel dramatic. It feels subdued, tired, and strangely patient. Eventually, you reach a point where movement slows naturally, where people begin to gather without obvious signal. No one speaks loudly. There is no speech, no raised voices, only nods and brief glances exchanged in passing. You take your place among them, standing easily, hands tucked into your coat, breath steady. The stone beneath your feet is cold but solid. Above you, the buildings loom quietly, their windows dark. Somewhere ahead, beyond streets and squares, larger structures wait, unseen for now. You do not picture them clearly. There is no need. This moment is enough. You stand there as the city settles fully into night, listening to the softened sounds of Petrograd at rest. The fog drifts, the river moves, the lamps burn. Whatever this evening will become has not yet taken shape, and that feels appropriate. For now, you are simply here, one presence among many, breathing in the cold air and letting the city hold you in its quiet pause. You remain where you are, not because you have been told to stand still, but because everyone else has slowed to the same quiet halt. The street no longer carries you forward. Instead, it holds you gently in place. Boots press into damp stone, the cold creeping upward until your feet feel heavy, as if rooted. Your hands rest near your sides or disappear into pockets, fingers stiff, knuckles pale beneath the skin. No banners rise, no signal cuts through the air. What surrounds you instead is a loose gathering of bodies, spaced just far enough apart to feel separate, close enough to share the same breath of cold night air. This is how it begins, not with movement, but with waiting that does not announce itself. Time stretches here in a way that feels unfamiliar. Minutes do not mark themselves clearly. There is no clock to glance at, no bell to count. The city hums faintly around you, but even that seems to pull back, as if allowing space for this pause. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, feeling the stiffness in your legs, the quiet complaint of muscles, already tired before anything has truly happened. Somewhere nearby, a man coughs once, then settles again. Another adjusts the strap of a rifle, slung awkwardly over his shoulder, the leather creaking softly before falling silent. These small sounds become noticeable only because there is so little else to hear. You study the people around you without turning your head too much. Faces are half lit by distant lamps, features softened by shadow and fog. No one looks heroic. Eyes are dull with fatigue, cheeks hollowed, expressions blank or cautiously neutral. These are people accustomed to standing in lines, to waiting for instructions that may or may not come, to holding themselves ready without knowing for what. You recognize that look because it mirrors your own. Whatever stories might be told later, this moment contains none of their certainty. It feels provisional, temporary, as if everyone is waiting for something to solidify before allowing themselves to believe in it. The cold works its way deeper as the waiting continues. It settles into your shoulders, your spine, the back of your neck. You roll your shoulders slowly, barely noticeable, easing the tension without drawing attention. Your breath forms faint clouds that drift and dissolve almost immediately. Each inhale carries the smell of damp wool, wet stone and distant smoke. Each exhale feels deliberate, measured, as though you're conserving energy for something undefined. You are aware of hunger in a distant, muted way, the kind that no longer demands immediate attention, only acknowledgement. Thoughts come and go without urgency. You recall fragments of conversation from earlier in the day, words spoken quietly, in corners, phrases that hinted at action without describing it. There was talk of numbers, of readiness, of timing that felt both imminent and vague. Standing here now, those words feel thin, almost unreal. What feels real instead is the weight of your coat, the cold pressing through the soles of your boots, the slow ache settling into your lower back. The body insists on its presence, even as the mind drifts toward abstraction. Occasionally, someone moves through the group, not leading, not commanding, just passing information in a low voice that rarely travels far. You catch fragments, a direction mentioned, a reassurance offered, a caution repeated. None of it sharpens the moment. It merely confirms that waiting remains the primary task. No one reacts strongly. There is no visible shift in posture, no sudden tightening of grips. The words are absorbed and set aside, folded into the quiet patience that has already taken hold. You realize gradually that this stillness is not accidental. It is the natural state of people who have learned that action often follows long stretches of inactivity. Factories taught this lesson well, as did lines for bread, queues for paperwork, days spent watching machines idle for lack of fuel or parts. Waiting is familiar terrain. It requires no speech, no justification. It simply exists, filling time without asking permission. Here, in this gathering, waiting feels almost practiced, as though everyone knows how to inhabit it without discomfort. Your gaze drifts to the ground, tracing the uneven lines between stones, the small puddles reflecting warped fragments of light. A drop of water falls from a gutter above, landing near your boots with a soft, hollow sound. It repeats at irregular intervals, creating a slow, accidental rhythm. You find yourself listening to it, letting it anchor your attention. In moments like this, the mind seeks simple patterns, something predictable to rest upon. Despite the uncertainty, there is no fear pressing against you. Not sharply, at least. What you feel instead is a muted awareness that things are unfolding beyond your immediate understanding. Decisions are being made elsewhere, by people you will not see tonight. That knowledge does not provoke resentment. It feels expected. You have never assumed that history would consult you personally before moving forward. Your role, whatever it becomes, will likely be small, contained, easily overlooked. As the waiting continues, you notice how the group subtly rearranges itself. People step closer together, not out of solidarity, but practicality, sharing warmth and space. Someone offers a cigarette, and it passes between a few hands before being extinguished carefully against a stone. The brief flare of light reveals tired faces more clearly, then darkness closes in again. No one speaks during this exchange. Words would feel excessive. The city seems to be holding its breath alongside you. Traffic has dwindled to almost nothing. Even the river's presence feels subdued, its earlier sounds softened by distance and fog. Above, the sky has deepened into a uniform darkness, stars hidden. The lamps burn steadily now, their light unwavering. You feel suspended between moments, no longer fully part of the ordinary evening, not yet part of whatever comes next. Eventually, without a clear signal, a subtle change passes through the group. It is not a command, not even a gesture, but a collective sense that standing still has reached its limit. People straighten slightly. Weight shifts forward instead of side to side. Hands emerge from pockets and find straps, sleeves, rough wooden stocks. The waiting does not end abruptly. It loosens its hold gradually, like a grip relaxing rather than releasing. You do not feel a surge of resolve or conviction. What you feel is a quiet readiness, born not of belief, but of repetition. You have waited long enough to know that movement, when it comes, will feel ordinary at first. For now, you take one last steady breath, letting the cold air fill your lungs, and remain exactly where you are for a few seconds longer, aware that even this pause will soon dissolve into motion, carrying you forward without ceremony. The stillness loosens further, not snapping apart but thinning, like fog disturbed by a slow-moving body. Someone nearby leans in close enough that you feel the warmth of their breath through wool and damp air. Words arrive softly, shaped to avoid travelling far, more suggestion than command. You listen, nod once, and let the sound settle, without fully fixing itself in your mind. The message is incomplete by the time it reaches you, already altered by the path it took to get here. It points somewhere ahead, gestures vaguely toward movement, offers reassurance without detail. That seems to be enough. You notice the same exchange repeating around you in quiet variations. A sentence murmured, a hand motion tracing an uncertain line through the air, a pause where clarification might have been. Each retelling strips something away while adding something else, until the instructions feel less like information and more like atmosphere. No one questions this out loud. There is an understanding, unspoken but shared, that pressing for certainty would only expose how little there is to give. You accept what you hear and prepare to act on it, even though the shape of that action remains indistinct. Your body responds before your thoughts catch up. Hands adjust straps and sleeves, shoulders square slightly, feet angle forward. These movements feel automatic, learned over years of responding to half-formed directives. You have followed orders like this before, orders that relied more on momentum than clarity. They rarely explained themselves, and yet they carried you somewhere all the same. The familiarity of the process brings a thin layer of calm, even as your mind circles unanswered questions without settling on any. As the group begins to move, slowly at first, the sound of boots returns, subdued but persistent. It forms a loose rhythm that replaces the long silence of waiting. You fall into step easily, neither leading nor lagging, matching the pace set by those nearest you. No one speaks now. There is a sense that words have already done as much as they can. What remains must be worked out through motion and proximity. The streets narrow again, guiding you forward without explanation. Buildings loom closer, their walls absorbing sound, making it feel as though the world has shrunk to this corridor of stone and shadow. A lamp flickers overhead, briefly illuminating faces as they pass beneath it. You catch fragments of expression, concentration fatigue, a distant, unfocused gaze. No one looks certain. That absence of certainty feels oddly stabilizing. It means you are not alone in your confusion. At an intersection, the group hesitates. The front slows, then stops. You feel the ripple of uncertainty travel backward, feet shuffling, shoulders tensing. Someone moves ahead to confer with another figure, barely visible in the dim light. Their heads bend close together, words exchanged too quietly to hear. When they separate, the pause lingers a moment longer than necessary, as if waiting for the decision to feel real. Then movement resumes, angled slightly to the left this time. No explanation follows. You accept the turn without question. As you walk, you become more aware of the small sounds that accompany you. The creak of leather, the soft clink of metal against wood, the occasional cough quickly stifled. Each noise feels magnified in the absence of speech. You wonder briefly how many people beyond these walls can hear you, then dismiss the thought. Tonight does not feel like a night for observation. It feels inward, contained, as though the city has folded in on itself. Fragments of instruction continue to surface as you move, a reminder to stay together, a caution about corners, a reassurance that resistance will be minimal, spoken with the same tone one might use to comment on the weather. You absorb these fragments without sorting them into a clear plan. They float through your awareness and settle wherever they find space. You suspect that others are doing the same, carrying a shared collection of partial understandings that may or may not align. The destination begins to announce itself, not through sight, but through subtle changes in the environment. The streets widen slightly. The buildings grow taller, more formal in their lines. The air feels cooler here, less sheltered, carrying a faint openness that suggests proximity to a larger space. You sense a shift in posture around you, a quiet straightening that comes not from confidence, but from recognition. Even without clear orders, you know you're approaching something that matters, if only symbolically. Someone ahead raises a hand briefly, signaling a slowdown. The group compresses, steps shortening. You find yourself closer to those beside you now, close enough to feel the brush of fabric when you move. No one complains. The closeness feels practical, even comforting. It reduces the number of decisions you need to make. You go where the group goes, stop when it stops, wait when it waits. The instructions, such as they are, arrive one last time in a low murmur that barely reaches you. They contain no new information, only emphasis. Forward, stay alert, listen. The words are familiar, almost generic, and you wonder how many times they have been spoken in similar circumstances, attached to entirely different events. They do not promise success or safety. They simply suggest continuation. You realize then that clarity may never arrive in the way you once imagined it might. There will be no moment where everything aligns, where purpose crystallizes into something solid and unmistakable. Instead, there is this: movement guided by fragments, decisions made in close quarters, direction chosen because someone had to choose it. The realization does not disappoint you, it feels honest. As the group advances, the fog thins, revealing more open space ahead. You cannot yet see the full shape of what lies before you, but its presence is felt in the way sound travels differently, in the way the air seems to expand. Your steps remain steady. Whatever uncertainty remains no longer presses as heavily. You have direction now, even if it lacks definition, and that proves sufficient. You continue forward, carrying incomplete instructions like a quiet weight, trusting that they will resolve themselves not through explanation, but through arrival. The space opens up gradually, almost without announcement. One moment you are moving through streets that guide your body forward with their narrow certainty, and the next you feel the air change around you. It grows broader, colder, less shaped by walls. Your steps slow not because anyone signals you to stop, but because the ground itself seems to ask for it. Ahead, beyond the thinning fog and scattered lamplight, something pale begins to take form. At first it looks like a trick of light, a low cloud caught at ground level, but as you draw closer, Its edges sharpen into lines too straight, too deliberate to be natural. The winter palace emerges quietly, occupying the night without effort, as if it has always been there and expects nothing else. You do not feel awe in the way you might have imagined. The building is immense, yes, stretching outward with a kind of exhausted confidence, but it does not loom aggressively. Its pale surface reflects what little light reaches it, giving it a muted glow that feels tired rather than proud. The palace does not resemble a fortress braced for defense. Instead, it looks like a body at rest, vast and immobile, holding still, not out of strength, but inertia. You sense no urgency coming from it, no challenge. It stands as it always has, not adjusting itself for you or anyone else approaching under cover of night. You drift closer with the others, instinctively keeping to darker edges, though there is little sense that concealment matters anymore. The open space around the palace feels strangely empty, stripped of ceremony. The square does not roar with crowds or bristle with barricades. Sound behaves differently here, dispersing instead of echoing, leaving footsteps feeling small and temporary. You become aware of how exposed you are, standing in such openness, yet the feeling does not sharpen into fear. It settles instead into a dull alertness, a readiness without expectation. From this distance, details begin to emerge. Tall windows stare outward, dark and unreadable, their glass catching fragments of lamplight and sky. Ornate lines trace the building's surface, decorative elements meant to impress, now softened by years of soot and weather. You think briefly about how many eyes have looked out from those windows, how many nights they have watched pass without consequence. Tonight feels no different in that regard. The palace does not acknowledge your presence, it simply remains. Those around you seem to share this muted reaction. No one speaks, no one points. Heads tilt slightly upward, then return to level. The building is taken in quickly, efficiently, as if assessed for practical reasons rather than symbolic ones. You feel no swelling of significance, no sense of stepping into legend. What you feel instead is a quiet mismatch between scale and emotion. Something this large should provoke something larger inside you, and yet it does not. The fog drifts lazily across the open space, thinning and thickening in slow patterns. As it passes in front of the palace, parts of the facade fade and reappear, giving the illusion of motion where there is none. The effect makes the building seem less solid, more temporary, as though it could dissolve back into the night if left alone long enough. You wonder how much of its authority has always depended on distance and lighting, on being seen rather than approached. Up close, even from here, it feels curiously fragile. You shift your weight, aware again of your own body, in contrast to the palace's vast stillness. Your boots are damp, your legs are tired, your hands feel clumsy inside your sleeves. You are small in this space, undeniably so, yet that smallness does not feel diminishing. It feels appropriate. History, you realize faintly, is not experienced from a grand vantage point. It is felt from the ground, through cold feet and stiff fingers, through moments that do not announce their importance. Somewhere to your left, a low voice murmurs, passing along another fragment of instruction. It barely registers. Your attention remains fixed on the building ahead, not with intensity, but with a kind of weary curiosity. This is the place so often spoken of, referenced with weight and implication. Standing here now, it feels stripped of those layers, reduced to stone, glass and shadow. You sense that whatever power it once contained has already loosened its grip, slipping away quietly before you arrived. The open space encourages lingering. No one rushes forward. Movement resumes slowly, cautiously, as though testing whether the palace will react. It does not. The silence stretches comfortably, broken only by the soft shuffle of boots and the occasional metallic sound of equipment settling against fabric. You move closer still, the building growing larger, without becoming more imposing. Its size begins to feel repetitive, almost monotonous, like a thought held too long without change. As you near the outer edges, you notice details at ground level. Steps worn smooth by countless passages, stone balustrades cold to the touch, patches of darker discoloration where moisture has settled. These are signs of use, not of defence. The palace feels less like a stronghold and more like an old workplace, emptied of its staff, left standing because no one bothered to move it. The realization drains the moment of drama, replacing it with something flatter, more subdued. You pause again, not directed to do so, but guided by the collective instinct of those around you. The group compresses slightly, forming a loose, quiet presence at the edge of the structure. The building fills your field of vision now, its upper stories disappearing into darkness. You feel no urge to look up further. The height does not matter. What matters is the threshold ahead, unseen but implied, the point where outside gives way to inside. The palace continues to hold its breath, unchanged by your proximity. You sense that whatever is meant to happen will not be announced by trumpets or resistance. It will occur quietly, almost accidentally, the way doors open when no one is truly guarding them. For now, you stand in the shadow of power that has already begun to fade, aware that the night remains calm, and that calm, somehow, feels more unsettling than any show of force would have. You do not feel a clear moment when standing becomes stepping. The shift happens quietly, almost politely, as though the space itself has decided that lingering has gone on long enough. Bodies around you lean forward in the same subtle way, weight transferring from heels to the front of the foot. No one counts down, no one signals. You move because movement has become the simplest option left. The cold stone beneath your boots gives way to smoother ground as you approach the entrance, your eyes adjusting to the darker shape of the doorway, set into the pale facade. It looks solid from a distance, thick and heavy, the kind of door meant to suggest permanence rather than practicality. As you draw closer, the details sharpen. The wood is old, layered with paint applied and reapplied over years, perhaps decades. The surface bears faint scars, marks left by hands, tools, weather. Metal fittings sit dull and unpolished, more decorative than defensive. You register these things without fully thinking about them, the way the mind catalogues details when it has no clear instruction on what to feel. Someone ahead of you reaches the threshold first. There is a brief pause, just long enough for anticipation to form, thin and uncertain. Then the door gives way. The sound is abrupt, sharper than anything you have heard all night. Wood cracks, not explosively, but decisively, the noise echoing outward and then falling away into the open space behind you. It feels louder than it should, not because it is violent, but because there is no answering sound to balance it. No alarm rises, no shouted challenge follows. The door yields with a tired compliance, as though it has been waiting for pressure and is relieved to finally receive it. You flinch despite yourself, shoulders tightening for a fraction of a second. The reaction fades quickly when nothing else happens. No shots ring out, no figures rush forward. The darkness beyond the doorway remains still, undisturbed except for the faint disturbance of dust shaken loose by the impact. You breathe out slowly, aware that you had been holding the breath without realizing it. The tension drains not into relief, but into confusion. You step forward over the threshold, your boot catching briefly on a splinter before finding stable ground inside. The air changes immediately. It is cooler here, heavier, carrying the smell of old wood, stone, and something faintly sweet, like long extinguished candles. Your eyes adjust to the dimness, tracing the outline of a corridor, stretching ahead, its floor smooth and faintly reflective. The space feels larger than it needs to be, built for processions rather than foot traffic, and yet it is empty now, its scale serving no one. Behind you, others follow, the doorway widening incrementally, as more bodies pass through. The sound of movement remains subdued, boots muffled by the floor, voices kept low without being instructed. The earlier crack of wood lingers in your ears, not as a threat, but as an unanswered question. That was it. That was the resistance you had prepared yourself for, however vaguely. The realization settles slowly, like dust drifting back down after being disturbed. You find yourself listening intently for something to replace the silence. Your senses strain forward, expecting footsteps approaching from deeper within, or a shouted order, or the sharp metallic sound of weapons being readied. Instead, there is only the soft accumulation of your own presence and that of those around you. The palace does not respond. It absorbs you the way a large room absorbs sound, leaving only echoes that fade quickly. The corridor ahead offers no clear direction. It branches subtly, openings on either side leading into darker spaces, doorways framing rooms you cannot yet see. Light filters in weakly from behind, outlining figures in silhouette. You move forward cautiously, guided more by instinct than instruction, staying close enough to others to feel connected without pressing into them. The floor beneath your boots feels solid, well maintained despite its age, and that solidity feels oddly intimate, as though you are stepping onto a surface long reserved for different kinds of footsteps. As you advance, the sense of anticlimax grows heavier. This was meant to feel like an entry into something contested, something alive with opposition. Instead, it feels like arriving after hours at a building that has already closed, lights dimmed, staff gone. The palace seems to have surrendered not in defeat but in absence. Whatever force once animated it has already departed, leaving behind architecture and air. You pass under an archway, its decorative elements barely visible in the low light. Your hand brushes briefly against the wall, the stone cool and smooth, worn down by time rather than conflict. The touch grounds you, reminding you of your own physicality, your place here as a body moving through space rather than a figure in a story. You withdraw your hand and continue, your pace steady, unhurried. Somewhere deeper inside, a voice murmurs, then another answers, the exchange brief and restrained. The words do not carry urgency. They do not carry excitement. They sound like adjustments, minor corrections to expectations that no longer apply. You realize that no one seems eager to hurry. The lack of resistance has not created momentum. If anything, it has slowed things further, introducing a hesitation, born not of fear, but of uncertainty about what comes next when the anticipated obstacle fails to appear. The corridor opens into a larger space, a hall perhaps, though its purpose is not immediately clear. The ceiling rises above you, disappearing into shadow, while the walls stretch outward, their decorations reduced to vague impressions. You stop without being told to, joining others in a loose cluster. The quiet feels deeper here, more complete, as though the building is finally aware of itself and has chosen stillness. You think briefly of the stories that will be told, of how this moment might be compressed into a single decisive action. The door broken, the palace taken. Standing here now, that compression feels dishonest. What you experience instead is a drawn-out unfolding, marked by pauses and reassessments, by the steady realization that the act of entering has not resolved anything. It has merely shifted you into a different kind of waiting. Your breathing slows to match the calm around you. The earlier expectation of confrontation dissolves completely. Replaced by a mild, persistent fatigue, you're aware of how long the night has already been, how much energy has been spent simply arriving here. The door behind you, now ajar and damaged, fades from your thoughts. It has served its purpose. The sound it made no longer matters. What remains is the interior space, vast and unresisting, and your quiet presence within it. You stand among others who share the same unspoken realization that the hardest part may not be breaking in, but understanding what it means to be inside when there is nothing left to push against. Once fully inside, movement resumes in a way that feels tentative rather than purposeful. The space ahead stretches longer than expected, unfolding corridor after corridor, each one nearly identical in its quiet restraint. Your footsteps land on polished floors that reflect faint lights without warmth, sending soft echoes upward towards ceilings too high to see clearly. The sound returns to you altered, dulled, as if filtered through layers of air and age. It feels less like an echo and more like a delayed acknowledgement, the building registering your presence without interest. You become aware of how small each sound is once released into this space. A boot heel touches stone, and the noise rises, then fades before it reaches anything solid enough to answer back. Even voices, when they appear briefly, seem to thin out and disappear almost immediately, swallowed by distance and architecture. It creates the impression that the palace is vast, not only in size, but in indifference. It does not amplify you. It does not resist you. It simply allows you to pass through, absorbing whatever noise you bring with you and leaving nothing behind. The corridors guide you gently forward without offering direction. They bend slightly, open into short crossways, then narrow again, never forcing a decision, never presenting a clear destination. You follow the flow of bodies ahead of you, trusting that wherever they are going is as reasonable a place as any. The floor beneath your boots is smooth and well kept, the surface worn into a subtle sheen by years of ceremonial passage. You imagine polished shoes once gliding here in deliberate patterns, steps practiced and precise, meant to be seen and remembered. Your own footsteps feel unremarkable by comparison, untrained, functional, leaving no visible trace. The walls on either side are lined with doors, many of them closed, their surfaces dark and uniform. Handles catch the light faintly, dull metal shaped more for appearance than use. You pass them without touching, without curiosity strong enough to interrupt your pace. Whatever lies behind them feels irrelevant for now. The corridors themselves demand attention, not through drama, but through repetition. Each step reinforces the sense of moving through something designed to outlast intention. Your breathing settles into a slow, steady rhythm, matching the measured pace around you. The earlier tension has thinned into something flatter, almost contemplative. You listen to the sounds that remain. Fabric brushing, fabric, a quiet cough quickly suppressed, the occasional creak of leather. These small noises feel intimate here, exposed by the surrounding silence. You become more conscious of your own body, of how loudly you exist in such a quiet place, and you adjust without thinking, placing your feet more carefully, shifting your weight more slowly. Light appears intermittently, filtering down from distant fixtures or side passages, creating pools of dim illumination that you pass through one by one. Each pool briefly reveals details before letting them fade again. You glimpse ornate mouldings softened by shadow, patterns in the stone floor worn smooth at the edges, faint discolorations where moisture has lingered over time. None of it feels pristine. The palace is well maintained, but not untouched. It carries the marks of long use, of countless movements that once mattered deeply to those making them. The further you go, the more the palace seems to recede inward. The outside world, with its fog and lamplight, feels distant now, almost unreal. Here, the air is cooler, drier, carrying a faint scent of dust and old polish. It fills your lungs differently, heavier, as if weighted by the years it has circulated within these walls. You find yourself breathing more shallowly, not from discomfort, but from an instinctive desire to disturb the space as little as possible. At times the corridor widens slightly, opening into transitional spaces that feel like pauses in architecture. You slow instinctively, then continue when those ahead do the same. There is no sense of urgency pushing you onward. If anything, the environment encourages restraint. The palace seems to stretch time, elongating moments until they lose sharp edges. You are aware that something significant is supposed to be happening, and yet the surroundings refuse to reflect that significance. You notice how easily sound loses its meaning here. A footstep does not announce intent. A voice does not carry authority. Even the memory of the door breaking feels distant now, stripped of its impact by the sheer volume of space between you and that moment. The palace has absorbed it, folded it into its quiet, rendering it unremarkable. This realization brings with it a subtle sense of disorientation. Without clear auditory cues, it becomes harder to measure progress, to tell whether you're advancing or merely wandering. The group thins and thickens as corridors intersect and diverge. Sometimes you find yourself with fewer people nearby, their shapes stretched thin by distance. Other times, bodies cluster briefly at narrow points, close enough for shared warmth before spreading out again. These shifts happen without comment, managed through instinct rather than instruction. You adapt easily, stepping aside when needed, closing gaps when they appear, your movements guided by proximity rather than command. You pass a window set high into the wall, its glass opaque with grime and darkness beyond. It offers no view, only a faint suggestion of the outside night. The sight anchors you briefly, reminding you that the city still exists beyond these walls, continuing its quiet routines, unaware of the subdued procession unfolding inside. The reminder does not comfort or unsettle you. It simply exists, another fact to be carried alongside the rest. As you move deeper, the corridors begin to feel less like passageways and more like holding spaces. They do not funnel you toward a clear endpoint. Instead, they invite lingering, encourage pause. You realize that the palace is not guiding you anywhere in particular. It is allowing you to occupy it, to drift through its interior without resistance. The lack of opposition has created a strange vacuum where purpose feels optional rather than required. Your footsteps continue to echo softly, each sound returning diminished, as if the building is listening out of habit rather than concern. It hears you, registers you, and then lets the sound dissolve into its vast interior. In that dissolution, you sense the beginnings of something else, not triumph, not defeat, but a quiet awareness that being inside power often feels like this: spacious, subdued, and strangely empty, leaving you alone with the sound of your own presence fading into silence. The first raised voice arrives almost as a surprise, not because it is loud, but because sound has become so carefully managed inside these walls. It cuts briefly through the still air, sharper than the murmurs you have grown accustomed to, and for a moment your body reacts before your thoughts do. Shoulders tense, heads lift, feet pause mid-step. The voice carries an edge of urgency, perhaps even authority, but it does not travel far. It reaches only those closest, then thins and dissolves into the vast interior, leaving behind a faint echo that feels unfinished. Another voice answers, then another, each one trying to assert itself, to shape the moment through volume alone. The effect is fleeting. The palace seems to take these sounds and gently press them flat, smoothing them into the background until they no longer stand apart from the silence. Words lose their sharpness almost immediately. Commands blur into suggestions. What remains are fragments, half-heard phrases that settle unevenly among the people nearby. You find yourself watching how sound behaves here, how it rises with intention and then falters, stripped of momentum. A shout attempts to organize movement, to draw lines through space, but by the time it reaches you, it has lost its certainty. You catch a direction without context, a name without explanation. You nod instinctively, though you are not sure to whom, and remain where you are. Others do the same, each responding to a slightly different version of the same message, creating a quiet, uncoordinated stillness. Gestures begin to replace words. A hand lifts, palm down, signaling restraint rather than advance. A finger points briefly toward a corridor, then drops again. These motions feel more appropriate to the space, less intrusive. They do not fight the acoustics. They accept them. You follow the gestures more readily than the voices, finding them easier to trust. They require less interpretation, less imagination. The raised voices attempt once more to gather force. Someone calls out again, louder this time, the sound carrying a note of frustration. It echoes faintly off distant walls, returning distorted and delayed, as if mocking the effort. You sense the speaker's resolve weaken in real time, the volume dropping, the words shortening. Soon, the voice falls back into the low register of everyone else, absorbed into the general murmur that barely qualifies as conversation. Confusion spreads not as panic, but as hesitation. Small groups form and dissolve, people stepping closer together to exchange quick words, then separating again without conclusion. You overhear questions asked without expectation of answers. Is this the way? Are they here? Do we wait? Each question hangs briefly in the air before sinking, unanswered, into the surrounding quiet. No one seems distressed by this. The confusion feels mild, almost routine, like a familiar inconvenience rather than a crisis. You remain aware of your own breathing, slow and even, grounding you as voices come and go around you. The palace feels unchanged by the fluctuations in sound. It neither amplifies nor resists. It simply endures, its corridors stretching on in patient indifference. You realize that shouting here achieves little. The building does not respond to urgency. It rewards stillness, absorbs insistence, and renders emotion optional. As the voices fade, the group settles into a pattern of pauses. Movement becomes intermittent. A few steps forward, then a stop. A glance exchanged, a shrug, a quiet adjustment of position. You notice how often people look not toward whoever last spoke, but toward the space itself, as if expecting the walls to offer guidance. They do not. The palace provides no cues, no focal point to gather attention. Its scale diffuses intent, making every direction feel equally plausible and equally uncertain. You shift your weight and feel the fatigue deepen slightly, a gentle heaviness settling into your legs. The effort of listening, of interpreting half-formed orders, takes its own toll. It is easier, you find, to let the sounds wash over you without trying to assemble them into a plan. Others seem to reach the same conclusion. The murmurs soften further, conversations ending not with resolution, but with silence. Somewhere nearby, a brief scuffle of sound suggests movement in another corridor, but it fades before you can identify its source. The palace feels full of these almost events, moments that promise significance and then withdraw. You wonder how many such moments have occurred here over the years, how often raised voices have tried and failed to impose meaning on these spaces. The thought does not linger, it drifts away, replaced by the immediate sensation of standing, waiting, listening. The absence of clear orders creates a peculiar calm. Without a directive to fulfill, there is nothing to rush toward. The urgency that might have accompanied louder voices never fully takes hold. Instead, you feel suspended in a state of readiness without direction, alert but unhurried. Your senses remain open, but your expectations narrow. You're here to respond, not to initiate. Gradually, even the murmurs diminish. The palace returns to its preferred quiet, the brief disturbance of raised voices, absorbed and forgotten. What remains is the soft, collective presence of those inside, bodies arranged loosely within the vast interior, sharing space rather than purpose. You realize that this too will be remembered later as something decisive, though it does not feel that way now. Standing here, surrounded by fading voices and uncertain gestures, the moment feels less like action and more like aftermath arriving early. You remain where you are, attentive but unpressured, listening, not for commands but for the subtle cues of movement around you. The palace listens as well, though without interest, allowing the last echoes of raised voices to dissolve completely into its quiet, leaving only the low, steady hum of people waiting to see what will happen when nothing more is said. The movement resumes without instruction, a slow drift rather than a march, carrying you from the narrow restraint of corridors into spaces that open suddenly and without warning. One step places you beneath a ceiling that rises far beyond comfortable scale, its height felt more than seen. The air changes again, cooler and more still, as if it has been waiting undisturbed. Light, scarce and indirect, spreads thinly across polished floors and climbs the walls in faint gradients. You pause instinctively, not out of caution, but because the room seems to require acknowledgement. It is not welcoming. It simply exists, vast and composed, indifferent to the small figures now crossing its threshold. These rooms were shaped for authority long before you arrived, their proportions calculated to impress those invited inside. Every surface suggests deliberation. Columns placed to guide the eye upward, walls stretched wide enough to dwarf conversation, doorways framed to slow entry and heighten anticipation. You feel the intention behind the design, even as its purpose has evaporated. The silence here is deeper than in the corridors, less accidental, as though carefully maintained over time. Your footsteps soften further, swallowed almost immediately by the expanse, leaving you with the sensation of moving without sound. You cross the room alongside others, spread out now by the sheer size of the space. The distance between you grows without effort, each person reduced to a solitary presence, navigating an environment that offers no guidance. Your eyes travel slowly across details revealed in fragments. Gilded mouldings dulled by shadow. Vast stretches of wall, broken only by decorative panels. Furniture positioned with ceremonial precision. Chairs stand unused, their placement suggesting meetings that once followed strict rules, conversations shaped by hierarchy and ritual. Tonight they serve no function beyond occupying space. The floor beneath you reflects faint outlines of movement, distorted and fleeting. You watch your reflection briefly, elongated and uncertain, then look away. The room does not encourage self-awareness. It redirects attention outward, toward scale rather than detail, toward the idea of power rather than its execution. You imagine voices once filling this space, measured and confident, rising to meet the ceiling before returning with added weight. Now, any sound feels out of place, stripped of amplification, denied the resonance it was built to provide. You feel a subtle pressure in your chest, not fear, but the physical response to standing inside something meant to overwhelm. The room asserts itself without effort, its dimensions doing the work that guards and declarations once did. And yet, despite its size, it feels strangely hollow. The absence of those who once animated it is palpable, more noticeable than their presence might have been. Authority, you realize, does not linger well once removed. It leaves behind only architecture, unable to perform the role it was designed for. As you move deeper into the palace, one room gives way to another, each larger or more ornate than the last, each sharing the same quiet detachment. The transitions between them are smooth, almost seamless, as if the building itself resists interruption. You pass through archways that frame the next space like a staged reveal, though there is no audience left to appreciate the effect. Curtains hang heavy and unmoving, their fabric absorbing what little light reaches them. The smell here is faint but distinct, a mixture of old textiles, dust, and something metallic that clings to the air. You notice how your posture changes unconsciously. Shoulders square, steps slow, movements become more deliberate, not because you feel watched, but because the space demands a certain restraint. Even in the absence of authority, the memory of it lingers, embedded in proportions and materials. You're aware that you do not belong here, not as these rooms were intended to be used. That awareness does not trouble you. It simply exists, another quiet observation to be carried alongside the rest. Others drift through the rooms with similar caution, some pausing to look, others moving steadily onward, eyes fixed ahead. There is no uniform reaction. Some faces show fleeting curiosity, others fatigue, others nothing at all. No one touches anything unnecessarily. The furniture remains undisturbed, the objects left exactly where they were, last placed by hands now long gone. The restraint feels mutual, as though both people and palace have agreed not to test each other. You pass a long table polished to a dull shine, its surface reflecting a thin band of light. Chairs line its length with careful symmetry, their emptiness more striking than if they were occupied. You imagine documents once spread here, decisions shaped and finalized, consequences set in motion with quiet confidence. Standing beside it now, the table feels inert, incapable of producing anything beyond its own presence. The power it once supported has already moved elsewhere, leaving behind only the suggestion of importance. The silence continues unbroken, heavy but not oppressive. It settles into your thoughts, slowing them, smoothing sharp edges. You find that expectations have almost entirely dissolved. There is no longer a sense of approaching climax or resolution. Instead, there is a steady procession through rooms that feel like relics of certainty, preserved but emptied. The palace does not resist your presence, but neither does it acknowledge it. You are allowed to pass, nothing more. As you move on, the scale begins to feel repetitive, the grandeur losing its impact through sheer abundance. One vast room follows another, each echoing the same quiet authority, each failing to produce any emotional response beyond mild weariness. The realization comes softly. Power, when encountered directly, is often less dramatic than imagined. Stripped of ceremony and audience, it becomes just another environment to walk through, impressive in construction, but inert in effect. Your steps carry you onward, guided by openings that suggest continuation rather than destination. The rooms recede behind you without comment, their silence closing in again once you leave them. You feel no sense of conquest, no thrill of arrival. What you feel instead is the growing understanding that these chambers were never meant to be experienced like this by people like you at a moment like this. And yet here you are, passing through them without resistance, leaving them unchanged, carrying with you the quiet knowledge that standing inside power does not necessarily mean touching it. As you continue moving without urgency, the palace begins to announce itself less through sight and more through scent. It reaches you gradually, not as a single smell, but as layers that settle into your awareness one by one. The air is cold and dry in places, then suddenly damp near stone walls that have held moisture for decades. There is the faint, unmistakable trace of old polish, wax rubbed patiently into wood and marble by hands that repeated the same motion day after day. It lingers quietly, stripped of its original purpose, no longer meant to impress, only to persist. Beneath it all lies dust, fine and dry, stirred gently by your passage, and then allowed to fall back into place. You breathe it in without thinking, grounding yourself in sensations that are stubbornly ordinary. The smell reminds you that this building, for all its scale and symbolism, is made of the same materials as any other structure. Stone sweats when the air turns cold. Wood dries and cracks. Fabric absorbs whatever passes through it and holds on longer than expected. Somewhere nearby, the scent of extinguished candles hangs faintly, a ghost of light that once flickered here with intention. It is not strong enough to evoke ceremony, only habit. You imagine someone long ago pinching a wick between fingers, smoke curling upward briefly before dissolving into the same air you breathe now. These smells do not stir emotion so much as they steady you. They pull attention away from abstraction and return it to the body. You notice how your breath moves more slowly here, how each inhale feels deliberate, cool against the back of your throat. The air settles into your lungs with weight, reminding you that you are present, physical, undeniable. The palace no longer feels like an idea or a symbol. It feels like a place that has been closed for the night, left to cool and gather dust while waiting for morning that may never come in the same way again. You move through another chamber, then another, and the scent shifts subtly with each transition. Near heavy curtains, the air smells faintly of fabric and age, a dryness that suggests long intervals without disturbance. Near doorways, the smell sharpens slightly, carrying traces of outside air drawn in earlier, now trapped and diluted. These changes are minor, easy to overlook, but you find yourself noticing them more than the architecture itself. Grandeur has lost its novelty, sensation has not. The presence of others nearby adds little to the mix. Human smells are muted, absorbed by wool coats and layers of cloth. There is no sweat yet, no sharpness of exertion. Everyone seems to move carefully enough to avoid stirring the air more than necessary. The palace remains largely undisturbed, its internal climate preserved by stillness. You sense that this quiet maintenance of atmosphere is part of its design, an unspoken requirement of power, that nothing feel hurried, nothing smell alive. As you pause briefly near a wall, the cold seeps through the fabric of your coat and into your shoulder. The stone radiates a chill that feels older than the night itself. You shift slightly, easing away without conscious thought. The physical discomfort is mild, manageable, but it reinforces the sense that this space was not built for lingering by bodies like yours. It was meant for passage, for display, for moments that arrived and departed without leaving traces behind. Now, in the absence of those moments, the building returns to its baseline state: cold, dry, patient. The smell of dust grows stronger in places where light is scarce. You imagine particles settling, undisturbed on surfaces meant to gleam, softening edges and dulling finishes. It occurs to you that dust is not a sign of neglect here, but of pause. Activity has slowed enough to allow it to accumulate. The palace has entered a state of waiting, similar to your own earlier, only stretched over a longer span of time. You and the building share this moment of suspension, each existing without clear instruction on what comes next. Breathing becomes something you are aware of continuously now. Each breath draws in the same quiet mixture of cold air and aged materials. Each exhale releases warmth that dissipates almost immediately. The air does not hold on to you. It accepts what you give it and lets it go. This too feels instructive. Power, you begin to sense, is not always something that presses back. Sometimes it simply absorbs and remains unchanged. The ordinary nature of these sensations strips the night of its imagined sharpness. There is no metallic tang of conflict, no acrid smoke of violence. There is only the smell of a building settling into itself, of materials existing as they always have when left alone. This absence of drama feels heavier than any confrontation might have. It leaves you with nothing to react against, nothing to resolve. You stand and breathe and move, accompanied by the quiet persistence of dust and cold air. As you continue forward, the scents remain consistent, a steady backdrop that does not shift with your thoughts. They do not signal progress or proximity to anything meaningful. They simply confirm that you are still inside, still moving, still present. The palace does not offer narrative cues, it offers only environment. And in that environment, your expectations thin further, replaced by a growing acceptance that this night will be remembered not for what it felt like, but for what it quietly was. The air carries no judgment. It does not care who walks through it or why. It has been breathed by servants and officials, by guards and guests, by cleaners moving through before dawn. Now it passes through you with the same indifference. You draw it in, release it again, and continue onward, grounded not in ideology or outcome, but in the unremarkable fact of being a body moving through a space that smells faintly of dust, cold stone, and extinguished light. Your steps slow without instruction as the space opens fully around you, wider and more deliberate than the rooms before it. The ceiling lifts higher here, the walls stretching outward in a way that suggests finality rather than passage. This room does not guide movement, it receives it. You come to a natural stop near its centre, not because others have stopped, but because continuing feels unnecessary. The air is colder here, less stirred, as though it has been waiting in stillness for hours. Light settles unevenly across long surfaces, revealing a room arranged for voices that are no longer present. You understand without being told that this was once a place where decisions hardened into orders, where words spoken calmly carried consequences far beyond these walls. Now, it holds only the faint echo of that purpose, emptied of its force. Furniture stands where it was last left, positioned with care that now feels excessive. A long table dominates the centre, its surface bare, polished smooth by repeated use. Chairs are arranged with quiet precision, pushed in slightly, aligned as if expecting occupants to return at any moment. You move closer without urgency, drawn by the ordinariness of it all. This is not a throne room in the way stories describe such spaces. There are no dramatic symbols demanding attention, no obvious focal point. Authority here was exercised through routine, through meetings that began and ended without spectacle. Standing beside the table, you feel how little separates this room from any other place where people gather to talk. And yet, this was where choices were weighed and made real, where lives beyond these walls shifted direction without those affected ever setting foot inside. You remain standing, hands at your sides, aware of how small your presence feels against the room's proportions. The floor beneath you is solid and cool, the stone carrying the memory of countless steps taken with confidence and purpose. You imagine officials entering with measured pace, voices low, expressions controlled. The room would have filled slowly, the air warming with breath and expectation. Decisions would have unfolded here, not through raised voices, but through quiet consensus and practiced authority. That atmosphere is gone now, drained away so completely that it feels almost impossible to reconstruct. What remains is shape without function, structure without intent. Others drift into the room behind you, spreading out instinctively, careful not to cluster. No one speaks. The silence feels appropriate, even respectful, though there is nothing here to demand reverence. You notice how no one sits. The chairs remain untouched, their purpose suspended along with everything else. Sitting would imply occupation claim, standing feels more honest. A temporary arrangement that acknowledges the uncertainty of your presence. You are not here to replace what was lost. You are here because the space has been left open. Your attention moves from object to object, without lingering too long on any one thing. A cabinet against the wall, its doors closed, a lectern pushed slightly aside, papers absent, surfaces cleared. The room has already been stripped of what mattered most. Power, you realize, departs lightly when it chooses to leave. It does not burden itself with furniture or decoration. It takes only its ability to decide and leaves the rest behind like a shell. Standing here now, you feel the delay between event and understanding, the space where meaning has not yet arrived to fill the absence. The weight of anticlimax settles gently over you. This should feel like arrival, like standing at the center of something decisive. Instead, it feels like arriving after the fact, finding only the residue of importance. You are aware that outside these walls, narratives will already be forming, words gathering momentum, shaping this night into something sharper than it feels. Inside this room, that future certainty has no presence. There is only quiet and the faint hum of bodies breathing in a space that no longer belongs to anyone. You shift your stance slightly, easing the pressure in your legs. Fatigue makes itself known in small ways, a heaviness behind the eyes, a dull ache along your spine. The room does not respond to your presence. It neither welcomes nor resists. It remains unchanged, a container emptied of its most essential contents. You understand then that power is not embedded in walls or tables. It is carried by people, and when they leave, it leaves with them, abandoning the spaces that once amplified it. Your thoughts drift briefly to what will happen here later, how this room will be described, photographed, remembered. Perhaps it will be restored, repurposed, claimed by new authority. Perhaps it will remain a symbol, its emptiness filled retrospectively with significance. Standing here now, none of that matter. The future has not yet reached this room. It exists in a narrow present, defined by absence and stillness. You remain standing, sharing the space with others who seem equally uncertain of what to do next. No one asserts control, no one issues commands. The room does not inspire action, it absorbs it. You feel the last traces of expectation dissolve, replaced by a calm acceptance that whatever meaning this night acquires will be assigned later, elsewhere, by people who are not standing here, breathing cold air and smelling dust. For now, you stand where decisions once were made, aware that power has already moved on, leaving behind only furniture arranged for voices that will not return tonight. The room does not push you onward, and so you remain. What had been movement, however hesitant, thins into stillness without a clear dividing line. Feet stop finding new ground, shoulders loosen slightly. The quiet presence of others spreads out and settles, as if everyone has reached the same unspoken conclusion at once. There is nowhere obvious to go from here. No door that demands attention more than any other. No sound that calls you forward. The energy that carried you through corridors and across thresholds does not vanish abruptly. It simply runs out, like a thought that reaches its end and does not know how to continue. You stand with your weight balanced evenly now, no longer angled toward motion. The room feels fuller than before, not because more people have entered, but because time has thickened. Each second stretches gently, unmarked by action. The air seems to cool further as bodies stop generating heat through movement. You become aware of the subtle sounds that persist in this pause. Fabric settling, a boot shifting against stone, the faint exhale of someone nearby. These sounds do not interrupt the silence. They live comfortably inside it, reminders that presence continues, even when purpose does not. Groups form and dissolve without intention. A few people drift closer together, perhaps for warmth, perhaps out of habit. Others remain where they are, creating pockets of space between themselves and the nearest body. No one takes charge of this arrangement. It organizes itself, slowly, organically, shaped by comfort rather than strategy. You notice how eyes wander, how gazes settle briefly on doorways, on walls, on the empty table, then move on again. There is no expectation attached to these looks. They are simply a way of passing the time. The pause invites reflection, though not the kind that arrives neatly. Your thoughts wander without urgency, touching lightly on earlier moments of the night before drifting away again. The memory of walking through fogged streets feels distant, flattened by the interior stillness. Even the sound of the door breaking seems far removed, as though it happened in another building altogether. What remains immediate is the sensation of standing, of feeling your legs support you, of sensing fatigue without needing to respond to it yet. You have learned how to exist inside waiting. This pause feels like its natural extension. Occasionally, someone shifts, as if to speak, then thinks better of it. Words feel unnecessary here, perhaps even intrusive. The room does not seem to require explanation. It holds you all without demand, its emptiness doing the work of containment. You sense a shared reluctance to disturb the quiet, not out of reverence, but because nothing would be gained by filling it. Any instruction offered now would feel arbitrary, detached from the reality of the space. Better, it seems, to let the pause complete itself. Time loses its edges. Without motion to divide it into segments, minutes blur together. You have no sense of how long you have been standing like this, only that it feels longer than expected and shorter than feared. The body adapts quickly. Muscles relax into the posture. Complaints softening into background noise. You become aware of the warmth inside your coat, the steady rhythm of your breathing, the way your hands hang loosely at your sides. These details feel more substantial than any abstract idea of victory or completion. The uncertainty does not trouble you as much as you might have imagined. There is no pressure to resolve it immediately. The pause feels earned, the natural result of momentum meeting emptiness. You recognize it from other parts of life, from moments when effort outpaces outcome and leaves a quiet gap behind. In that gap, people often discover that they do not know what they were expecting to find. Standing here now, you accept that this may be one of those moments. The room remains unchanged throughout this lingering. It does not offer cues, does not shift its mood in response to the lengthening stillness. Its silence is consistent, impartial. You realize that this pause will not announce its end any more than it announced its beginning. Eventually something will happen, or someone will move, and the moment will pass without ceremony. Until then, you stand among others who are equally unsure whether to advance or remain, sharing a long, quiet suspension that feels less like a failure to act, and more like the natural aftermath of motion finally reaching a place where it has nowhere else to go. Without movement to hold it at bay, tiredness finds you easily. It does not arrive as a sudden wave or a sharp collapse of strength. It settles instead, gradually and thoroughly, like dust accumulating on an undisturbed surface. Your shoulders sag a fraction of an inch, barely noticeable, but enough to change how your coat hangs. Your breath deepens, not from exertion, but from the body's quiet decision to conserve what remains. The room does not change when this happens. It accepts your fatigue without comment, allowing it to spread through you at its own pace. You notice it first in your arms. They feel heavier than before, as though gravity has increased slightly without explanation. Fingers loosen, no longer gripping anything with intent. Your jaw unclenches, releasing tension you had not realized you were holding. The expectation that once hovered at the edge of your thoughts fades further, thinning into something vague and unimportant. Whatever triumph was supposed to feel like does not materialize. In its place is a simple desire to rest, to let the night finish whatever it has begun without demanding anything more from you. The stillness around you seems to encourage this surrender. Others shift subtly, rolling shoulders, adjusting stances, leaning briefly against walls before straightening again. No one remarks on it. Fatigue here is shared and unremarkable, as common as the cold air filling the room. You recognize it in the slow movements, the longer pauses between steps, the way eyes linger unfocused on empty space. The palace holds all of this without distinction, its vast interior indifferent to the collective weariness settling into its floors. Your breathing grows slower, more deliberate. Each inhale feels heavier, as though drawing the air requires slightly more effort than before. Each exhale carries warmth that disappears almost immediately, swallowed by the room's chill. You feel the weight of hours spent waiting, walking, listening. None of it was especially strenuous, and yet it has drained you all the same. The exhaustion is not physical alone. It sits behind your eyes, dulling thoughts before they can fully form. Standing becomes an exercise in patience rather than readiness. Your legs ache faintly, a low, persistent discomfort that reminds you of how long you have been upright. You shift your weight again, then stop, finding that even small adjustments require consideration. The floor feels colder now, the stone drawing warmth steadily upward. You imagine sitting briefly, then dismiss the thought without effort. Sitting would not change the tiredness. It would only make standing again more difficult. Around you, the quiet continues uninterrupted. There are no new sounds to react to, no sudden developments to sharpen attention. The absence of stimulation allows the mind to drift, not toward reflection, but toward blankness. Thoughts arrive slowly and leave just as slowly, dissolving before they can gather meaning. You are aware of yourself breathing, standing, existing, and very little else. This simplicity feels almost deliberate, as though the night has stripped away everything unnecessary. You think briefly of how exhaustion alters perception. It flattens emotion, smooths out extremes, makes everything feel equally distant. Standing here now, you understand how easily moments like this are misunderstood later. Fatigue does not look dramatic from the outside. It does not announce itself. It simply reshapes experience until urgency loses its edge and significance feels optional. You wonder how many decisions in history were influenced not by conviction, but by tiredness, quietly steering people toward the path of least resistance. The idea drifts away, leaving behind only the sensation of heaviness in your chest and limbs. You're no longer waiting for something to happen. You are simply here, occupying space until time moves forward on its own. The room seems to encourage this passivity. Its size makes effort feel pointless. Its silence makes action feel unnecessary. You sense that even if someone were to speak now, their words would struggle to penetrate the haze settling over everyone. Your eyelids feel heavier, though you remain fully awake. The body flirts with rest, testing its boundaries. You blink slowly, once, then again, and find that the room looks unchanged each time your eyes reopen. Nothing has shifted in your absence, however brief. This consistency reinforces the sense that you are not missing anything by letting attention soften. The palace is not going anywhere, neither are you. Breathing steadily, you allow the tiredness to take its place. There is no shame in it, no disappointment. It feels earned, the natural result of a night spent moving through spaces that demanded presence without offering resolution. The expectation of triumph fades completely now, replaced by a muted acceptance that this night is not meant to deliver satisfaction. It is meant to pass. You remain standing, shoulders relaxed, breath slow, awareness dulled just enough to make the stillness comfortable. Exhaustion has arrived and settled, not as an ending, but as a companion, guiding you gently away from anticipation and towards something quieter, something closer to rest, as the palace continues to hold you in its vast, unresponsive calm. In the quiet that follows fatigue, your attention turns outward again, drawn not by expectation, but by habit. You find yourself listening, not actively, not with tension, but with the slow, patient focus of someone accustomed to waiting for cues. The room holds its breath, though not in anticipation. It simply remains as it is, spacious and unmoved. You stand within it, ears attuned to the possibility of something breaking the stillness, a sound that might give shape to the night and explain what this moment is meant to be. At first, you think you hear something more than what is already present. A faint shift in the air, perhaps, or the suggestion of a voice carried from deeper within the palace. Your body responds before your thoughts catch up, posture straightening slightly, breath pausing at the top of an inhale. The sensation fades almost immediately. What remains is the same low background of near silence, punctuated only by the soft shuffle of boots as someone nearby adjusts their stance. The disappointment is mild, barely noticeable, but it settles into you all the same. You listen more carefully now, separating sound from expectation. The palace offers a steady collection of small noises that repeat without variation. Footsteps echo faintly in distant corridors, arriving softened and directionless. You cannot tell where they originate or where they are headed. They pass through the space like weather, noticeable but not meaningful. Occasionally the sound of fabric brushing fabric or a quiet exhale breaks the pattern, then blends back into it. None of these sounds carry significance. They simply confirm that others are present, moving gently, existing alongside you. The defining moment you might once have imagined feels increasingly unlikely. You picture it briefly, a command ringing out, a door thrown open somewhere ahead, a sudden rush of activity that would mark a clear shift. The image feels out of place here, like a story imposed on a setting that does not support it. The palace has taught you how sound behaves within its walls. It flattens urgency, dulls sharp edges, turns declarations into murmurs. Even if something dramatic were to happen, it would likely arrive already softened, stripped of its ability to define. You remain still, ears open, letting the sounds come to you rather than reaching for them. The act of listening becomes less about gathering information and more about occupying time. You notice how silence is never complete. It is always textured, layered with distant movement and subtle human presence. This realization feels oddly comforting. The absence of a defining sound does not mean nothing is happening. It simply means that whatever is happening does not need to announce itself. Your breathing continues its slow rhythm, barely audible even to you. The air moves in and out, carrying the same faint mixture of cold and age. Each breath feels like a marker of time passing, more reliable than any external signal. You measure the moment not in events, but in breaths taken and released. The palace seems to encourage this inward focus, offering no distractions to pull you away from it. As minutes stretch, your expectations thin further. The idea of a single moment that will explain everything begins to feel unnecessary. You realize that waiting for such a sound has been a habit rather than a need, shaped by stories and assumptions rather than experience. Standing here now, listening to the soft shuffle of boots and the occasional echo of distant steps, you understand that meaning does not always arrive with a clear signal. Sometimes it accumulates quietly, indistinguishable from the background until long after the fact. Someone nearby clears their throat softly, the sound quickly absorbed by the space. Another person takes a few steps, then stops again, their movement echoing briefly before fading. You note these sounds without attaching importance to them. They are simply part of the ongoing presence of people who, like you, are listening for something they cannot quite name. The shared act of listening creates a subtle connection, though no one acknowledges it openly. You feel the urge to look around, to search faces for clues, but resist it. Visual confirmation would offer no more clarity than sound has. Everyone here wears the same muted expression of waiting, eyes unfocused, attention dispersed. The palace provides no focal point, no direction for attention to gather. It remains a vast, neutral container, allowing you to listen without responding. The longer you stand, the more you become aware of the quiet resilience required to wait without outcome. It is a different kind of endurance, one that does not rely on adrenaline or resolve. It requires patience and acceptance, a willingness to let time pass without demanding that it justify itself. You sense this quality settling into the group as a whole, a collective relaxation into uncertainty. Eventually, you stop actively listening for change. The act of listening itself softens, becoming part of the background. Sounds continue to arrive and depart without altering your state. The defining moment you once anticipated does not come, and the absence of it no longer feels like a lack. It feels like a truth quietly revealed, that nights like this often end not with a sound, but with a gradual return to ordinary noise, leaving behind only the memory of having listened for something that never announced itself. The word reaches you without ceremony, carried on a low voice that does not try to rise above the room. It is spoken plainly, almost casually, as though it refers to a task completed rather than an event meant to divide time into before and after. You catch it mid-sentence, without emphasis, and for a moment you are not certain you heard correctly. The sound dissolves quickly into the surrounding air, leaving the syllables thin and weightless. Someone says it is over. The phrase hangs there briefly, then settles, unable to attach itself to anything solid. You wait for a response from the room, for some shift in atmosphere that might confirm the statement. Nothing changes. The space remains vast and quiet, its proportions unchanged by the announcement. The walls do not echo the word back with added meaning. The ceiling does not seem to lower an acknowledgement. The palace receives the declaration the same way it has received everything else tonight, absorbing it without reaction. Standing where you are, you feel the mismatch immediately. If this is victory, it does not resemble the shape you were taught to expect. You look around slowly, not searching for confirmation, so much as orienting yourself again. Faces nearby show no sudden relief, no visible transformation. Some people nod faintly, others do not react at all. The word has not altered posture or expression. It has not lightened the air or sharpened attention. It sits among you like a misplaced object, present but unintegrated, waiting for someone to decide what to do with it. Your own reaction surprises you by its absence. There is no rush of feeling, no surge of satisfaction or disbelief. Instead, you feel a quiet neutrality, as though the announcement has confirmed something you already suspected but never articulated. The night has been drifting toward this conclusion for some time, not through decisive action, but through gradual subtraction. Resistance faded, voices softened, purpose thinned. What remains now is not triumph, but a kind of administrative ending, the closing of a door that was already standing open. You notice how the word fails to fill the room. It echoes weakly, if at all, swallowed by distance and architecture. Victory, when spoken here, feels too small for the space, too abstract to engage with the physical reality around you. The chairs remain empty, the table remains bare. The cold air continues to settle against stone and wood. Nothing about the environment confirms that something fundamental has changed. Time resumes its slow passage, unaffected by the declaration. People begin to shift again, movements cautious and unhurried. A few step closer together, exchanging brief looks or murmured comments. The tone remains subdued, practical. No one raises their voice. There is no sense of release, no visible exhale from the collective body. The palace continues to hold you all in the same quiet suspension it has maintained throughout the night. You consider what it means for something to be over. Usually, the end of an effort brings clarity, a feeling of arrival. Here, the ending feels provisional, more like a pause labelled prematurely. You are aware that elsewhere, beyond these walls, the word will take on weight. It will be repeated, expanded, explained. It will be given edges and consequences. Inside this room, it feels unfinished, unable to account for the fatigue in your limbs or the emptiness of the space around you. The absence of celebration feels deliberate, even appropriate, standing amid furniture meant for authority now abandoned. It is difficult to imagine shouting or applause without it sounding absurd. The palace does not invite noise. It does not reward declaration. It remains neutral, a backdrop indifferent to outcomes. You sense that any attempt to mark the moment would feel performative, disconnected from the reality of how it unfolded. Your thoughts drift to how easily words are used to simplify complex nights like this. One word spoken quietly is expected to summarize hours of waiting, walking, listening, standing. It is meant to bridge the gap between effort and meaning. Standing here now, you feel that gap remain open. The word does not close it, it merely points to it. You adjust your stance again, easing the tension in your legs. Fatigue presses more firmly now, encouraged by the idea that nothing further is required of you. If it is truly over, then there is nothing left to prepare for, nothing left to hold yourself ready against. The realization brings not relief, but a deeper tiredness, as though your body has been waiting for permission to acknowledge how long the night has been. Around you, the group begins to fragment gently. Some people drift toward exits or corridors, movements slow and thoughtful. Others remain where they are, as if reluctant to leave the room just yet. There is no coordinated response to the announcement, no shared understanding of what comes next. Victory, it seems, has not provided a script. It has simply removed the expectation of resistance, leaving behind a wide, undefined space. You remain standing, letting the moment settle in its own incomplete way. The word lingers in your mind, thin and slightly unreal. You test it silently, repeating it without sound, and find that it does not anchor itself to any specific feeling. It floats detached, waiting to be claimed by future retellings. For now, it feels like a label applied too early, before the shape of what has happened can be fully understood. The palace remains unchanged as the minutes pass. Its silence continues uninterrupted, its rooms holding their emptiness without complaint. You realize that whatever has ended tonight has done so quietly, without ceremony or clarity. Standing here, surrounded by vast space and muted presence, you understand that victory does not always announce itself with force. Sometimes it arrives as a word spoken softly, unable to fill the room it is meant to define, leaving you to stand within the aftermath, unsure not of what has happened, but of what it means. The night does not announce itself here. It arrives gradually, slipping into corners and recesses without sound, dimming what little light remains until everything feels evenly subdued. You become aware of it not through sight alone, but through temperature. Cold seeps upward from the floors, first into your boots, then into your legs, settling there with patient insistence. The stone has been cooling for hours, perhaps longer, and now it begins to draw warmth steadily from anyone who stands upon it. You shift your weight, not to move on, but to remind your body that it is still awake, still present. Time loosens its hold as the darkness thickens. Without windows offering a view of the outside sky, there is no clear marker for how late it has become. Lamps burn steadily in some areas, flickering weakly in others, their light no longer sharp enough to define edges. Shadows soften, spread, overlap. Distances feel less certain now. A doorway that once seemed close appears farther away, its outline blurred. The palace grows inward, retreating into itself, becoming less a sequence of rooms and more a continuous interior night. You notice how voices have nearly disappeared, not silenced exactly, but thinned to the point of irrelevance. The occasional murmur drifts through the space and then vanishes before reaching anyone beyond its immediate source. Even footsteps sound rarer now, as if people are reluctant to disturb the quiet that has settled so completely. Movement still happens, but slowly, carefully, each step placed with more attention than before. The night encourages this restraint, rewarding stillness with a kind of fragile comfort. Your breath fogs faintly in front of you when you exhale, the cloud dissipating almost immediately. The air feels heavier, colder, pressing gently against your chest. You draw your coat tighter, aware that the fabric offers only limited protection against the chill rising from below. The palace does not insulate warmth well. It was built to impress, not to comfort. Its vastness now works against you, dispersing heat, amplifying cold, reminding you that this space was never meant to be occupied like this, at this hour, by people who intend to remain. Standing here, you feel the rhythm of time change. Earlier, moments were shaped by movement and anticipation. Now they stretch and blur, losing definition. You find it harder to recall exactly how long you have been inside. The sequence of rooms and corridors merges into a general impression of distance, travelled without destination. The night deepens, and with it comes a sense of being unmoored from ordinary progression. You exist in a long present, held gently but firmly by the surrounding stillness. The palace seems to respond to the darkness by withdrawing further. Decorative details fade into shadow, their significance reduced. Gold and colour lose their distinction, becoming variations of grey and black. What remains visible is structure, walls, floors, doorways, functions stripped of ornament. You sense that the building is revealing its true self now, no longer performing for daylight or ceremony. It rests in this subdued state, indifferent to who occupies it or why. Others nearby appear similarly subdued. Postures relax further, shoulders slumping slightly, heads lowering as if drawn down by the weight of the hour. Some lean against walls, careful not to sit, conserving energy while remaining upright. Eyes blink more slowly. Conversations, when they occur, are brief and practical, focused on immediate needs rather than meaning. There is no attempt to frame the night, no effort to give it shape through words. The darkness does that work on its own. You become acutely aware of the cold as it continues its slow advance. It creeps into your joints, stiffening knees and ankles, making each small movement more deliberate. You flex your fingers inside your sleeves, feeling the slight resistance of chilled muscles. The sensation is not painful, just persistent, a reminder that time is passing whether or not anything changes. The palace does not resist the cold, it welcomes it, stone and marble holding onto it with ease. The stillness wrapping the moment feels layered, almost protective. It dulls edges, softens thoughts, makes sharp conclusions impossible. You find it difficult to imagine raising your voice here now. The night would absorb it instantly, rendering it unnecessary. Even decisive words spoken earlier feel distant, their impact blunted by hours of quiet that followed. Darkness has a way of levelling significance, bringing everything down to the same muted register. Your mind drifts not toward grand ideas, but towards small, physical considerations. How long you have been standing, how warm your breath feels against the scarf at your neck, how the floor seems colder in some spots than others. These details feel more reliable than any abstract understanding of what has occurred. The palace at night offers no narrative, it offers sensation and duration, asking only that you endure both. At times, you think you hear movement deeper inside, but it resolves into nothing more than the settling of the building itself. Old structures make sounds at night, quiet adjustments as materials respond to cooling air. A faint creak, a distant tap, a subtle shift that suggests presence without intention. These sounds blend seamlessly with the human ones, making it difficult to distinguish between them. The palace and the people inside it seem to share the same subdued state, both waiting without expectation. The darkness grows more uniform. As lamps dim or are extinguished one by one, shadows deepen, corners disappearing entirely. You feel less compelled to look around now. Sight offers diminishing returns. Instead, you listen to the quiet and feel the cold and breathe steadily, letting the night define the boundaries of awareness. The palace becomes less a place you are inside and more an environment you are suspended within. Time continues to loosen, stretching into something broad and indistinct. You no longer measure it in minutes or events. You measure it in the slow settling of fatigue, in the steady advance of cold, in the deepening stillness that wraps everything evenly. The night has taken hold inside the palace, and with it comes a sense that whatever meaning this moment will have has already slipped beyond reach, leaving behind only the quiet endurance of standing, breathing, and waiting as darkness finishes its gentle, unhurried work. You remain where you are, not because anything holds you there, but because standing has become the most natural response to the night as it now exists. Movement feels optional, almost unnecessary. The palace has settled into a deeper quiet, and within that quiet, your body has learned how to exist without expectation. Your feet are planted firmly on the cold floor, knees slightly bent to ease the strain, shoulders relaxed enough to avoid pain, but not enough to invite sleep. Standing still acquires its own weight, a physical presence that presses gently upward through your legs and into your spine. It is not uncomfortable, so much as persistent, a reminder that time continues even when nothing else seems to. Around you, others share the same posture of endurance. No one appears eager to leave or to advance. The room holds a scattered arrangement of figures, each occupying a small island of space, separated by several paces of emptiness. You sense that many of them are thinking similar thoughts, though no one speaks them aloud. There is an unspoken understanding that whatever meaning this night will eventually carry is no longer being shaped here. Decisions are forming elsewhere, in rooms you have not entered, in conversations you will never hear. Your role, you realize, is not to decide, but to be present, to occupy this moment while its interpretation drifts beyond reach. The idea settles into you slowly, without bitterness. History, as it unfolds from the inside, rarely feels like action. It feels like waiting, like holding position, while others determine how events will be framed and remembered. Standing here, you understand that your presence will later be described as participation, as agency, as movement toward a goal. In reality, it feels more like suspension, like being held in place by circumstance rather than intent. This realization does not diminish you. It simply clarifies the shape of the experience. Your body adjusts again, making small accommodations to the strain. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, feeling the muscles respond with practiced efficiency. The cold remains steady, no longer advancing, but not retreating either. It has found its equilibrium, settling into your boots and lower legs, reminding you of the hour, without demanding attention. You breathe slowly, each inhale measured, each exhale faintly visible in the dim air. The rhythm becomes something you can rely on, a quiet metronome marking the passage of time more accurately than any clock could. The palace continues to recede into shadow. Details that once drew your eye have softened into indistinct shapes. Furniture blends into walls. Doorways lose their depth. What remains is space and the bodies within it. You are aware of how little sound you make when you stand still, how easily you disappear into the environment simply by not moving. This invisibility feels instructive. It mirrors the way individual experience often dissolves within larger narratives, leaving behind only generalized impressions and simplified conclusions. You think briefly about how this moment will be described by those who are not here. Words like decisive and dramatic will likely appear, attached to images of motion and confrontation. Standing quietly in a vast room will not translate easily into those accounts. The stillness will be edited out, the waiting condensed or omitted altogether. You accept this without resentment. Stories need shape, and stillness resists shaping. It stretches too evenly, offers no sharp edges to hold on to. The weight of standing still deepens, not as discomfort, but as awareness. You feel the accumulated hours in your joints, the slow drain of energy that comes from sustained attention without release. It is a different kind of fatigue than exertion produces. It does not ache sharply or demand rest immediately. Instead, it presses inward, dulling urgency and softening thought. In this state, ambition feels distant, almost theoretical. What remains is endurance, quiet and unremarkable. Others nearby make small movements, testing whether standing can still be maintained. A shoulder leans briefly against a wall. A foot lifts and settles again. These gestures feel intimate, shared without acknowledgement. You recognize them as negotiations between body and time, attempts to remain present without exhausting what little energy remains. No one complains. Complaints would require focus and intention, both of which feel unnecessary now. The realization arrives without drama. Whatever you have done tonight is already complete, not because it achieved a clear result, but because your role has reached its natural limit. Standing here, you are no longer contributing to the unfolding of events. You are witnessing their quiet aftermath, existing within a pause that will later be smoothed over and given meaning by others. This understanding does not provoke frustration. It brings a subdued calm, a sense of having reached the edge of personal involvement. You remain where you are, allowing the stillness to hold you. The palace offers no cues, no instructions. It does not ask you to leave or to stay. It simply contains you, as it contains the night, the cold, and the lingering presence of those who have come this far only to discover that history, when experienced directly, often feels like this, standing quietly in a large dim room, aware that the story is already being told somewhere else, shaped by voices you cannot hear, while you continue to breathe, balance and wait, carrying the full weight of the moment without the authority to define it. What once felt like forward motion has thinned into something almost abstract. The urgency that carried you across streets and through doors has not vanished so much as dissolved, leaving behind a residue that clings faintly to the edges of thought. You notice it when you begin to move again, slowly this time, not because you are directed to, but because standing still too long begins to feel heavier than walking. Your footsteps return to the corridors, but they sound different now. Each one produces an echo that arrives late and softened, as if unsure whether it is still needed. The palace responds to you with repetition rather than resistance, offering back only what you give it, diminished. The hallways feel emptier than before, though you know they are not. People are still scattered through the interior, but distance and darkness stretch between you, thinning presence into suggestion. You pass through spaces that earlier seemed charged with anticipation, now stripped of even that faint tension. Doors stand open or closed without meaning. Corners reveal nothing new. The architecture repeats itself patiently, as though waiting for you to catch up to the realization that nothing further is required. The building has shifted from obstacle to container, from something to move through into something that simply holds what remains. As you walk, the echoes follow you at a measured pace, each sound trailing just behind the movement that caused it. They feel like reminders rather than responses, subtle confirmations that you are still here, still moving, even as the reason for moving becomes harder to define. Earlier, sound hinted at possibility, at unseen activity ahead. Now it does the opposite. It confirms absence. Footsteps echo because there is so much empty space to receive them. Voices fade quickly because there is nothing left to rally. You become aware of how anticlimactic this feels, though the thought carries no disappointment sharp enough to linger. It is simply an observation, one more detail to register and set aside. The drama you might have expected has already passed, or perhaps never existed in the way you imagined. Standing inside it now, you sense that you arrived at the quiet part, the moment after decisions have been made and before explanations have been constructed. The palace reflects this perfectly. It offers no spectacle, no focal point, only long hallways that stretch into shadow and return your own sounds to you as echoes. Your body moves with practiced economy, conserving energy, stepping carefully on cold floors that no longer surprise you. The chill has become familiar, a steady presence rather than an intrusion. You notice how your shoulders remain slightly hunched, how your head tilts downward, as if instinctively lowering your profile in a space that no longer requires alertness. Fatigue shapes your posture more than intention does now. Each step is taken, not towards something, but away from the strain of standing still too long. You pass others occasionally, their figures emerging briefly from shadow before dissolving back into it. Exchanges are minimal. A glance, a nod, nothing more. There is no shared excitement to confirm, no urgency to communicate. Everyone seems to understand, without speaking, that whatever mattered most has already slipped by quietly. The awareness creates a subdued camaraderie, a recognition that you are all inhabiting the same anticlimax, each carrying it in your own body. The corridors seem longer than before, not because they have changed, but because time has stretched again, pulled thin by repetition and silence. You find yourself counting steps without meaning to, then stopping when you realize it makes no difference. The echoes continue regardless, each one identical to the last. The palace does not guide you out or deeper in. It allows you to wander within its emptiness, to experience the aftermath at your own pace. At moments you think you hear something ahead that might reintroduce momentum, a cluster of voices, a burst of movement. Each time, it resolves into nothing more than sound travelling strangely through distance and stone. The realization arrives gently but firmly. There will be no second surge, no renewed urgency. The night has already given you what it will. What remains is the quiet acknowledgement that the dramatic version of events belongs to another place, another time, perhaps another telling. You continue walking, letting echoes replace intention, letting empty hallways absorb whatever expectations linger. The palace feels less imposing now, its vastness no longer charged with meaning. It is simply large, simply old, simply quiet. You move through it as one might move through any building after hours, aware that the important work has already concluded and that you are present only to witness the stillness that follows. The dull awareness settles fully. You did not miss anything exactly, but you arrived at the point where drama gives way to routine, where momentum gives way to echoes. Standing inside history, you realize, often feels like this. Like stepping onto a stage after the actors have left, hearing only the sound of your own footsteps bouncing back at you, confirming not what has changed, but how quietly it did so. As you move through the palace in this subdued hour, a quiet understanding begins to form, not as a thought you actively pursue, but as something that settles into you alongside the cold and the fatigue. Whatever story will be told about this night will not be shaped here. These rooms are too still, too indifferent, too full of pauses and unfinished moments. The silence surrounding you feels incompatible with the kind of clarity stories prefer. Standing within it, you sense that meaning has already begun to drift outward, slipping beyond these walls to places where words travel faster than footsteps ever could. The palace remains unchanged as this realization takes hold. Its corridors stretch on with the same patient neutrality, offering no commentary on what has occurred. You pass through spaces where echoes still trail behind you, softer now, less insistent, as if even they are growing tired of repetition. The building does not seem concerned with how it will be remembered. It has endured enough nights to know that memory belongs to those who leave, not to the places they pass through. You feel a subtle separation forming between experience and interpretation, a widening gap that will soon be filled by voices far removed from this quiet interior. You imagine those voices gathering elsewhere, in rooms smaller and warmer, in spaces where the air is alive with breath and anticipation. There, the night will be condensed into decisive phrases, shaped into sequences that move cleanly from tension to resolution. Details will be sharpened or discarded as needed. Hesitation will be reframed as strategy. Stillness will become resolve. The long pauses you have inhabited will be compressed into moments too brief to register. You understand, without resentment, that this is how stories survive. They cannot afford the luxury of uncertainty you have lived inside. Here, within the palace, nothing urges you to participate in that transformation. The rooms do not invite explanation. They offer no vantage point from which the night appears coherent. Instead, they continue to present themselves as they are, large, cold, and quietly exhausted. You feel how easily this experience could be misunderstood by someone who was not present, how difficult it would be to convey the weight of waiting, the texture of silence, the way momentum thinned rather than exploded. Words seem inadequate for that task, and perhaps that is why they will be reshaped elsewhere. You pause near a window that offers no real view, its glass reflecting only dim interior light and your own indistinct outline. Beyond it, the city continues to exist, unaware of the fine distinctions you have been carrying. Streets will soon fill with sound again. Conversations will overlap and build, each retelling adding volume and certainty. You picture headlines forming, speeches being drafted, events aligning themselves into narratives that move forward with purpose. Compared to that, this night feels fragile, easily overwritten. The thought does not trouble you. There is a calm acceptance in recognizing that lived experience and remembered history rarely align. You have stood through the hours when nothing insisted on being remembered, when the most defining feature of the night was its refusal to resolve cleanly. That knowledge feels personal, almost private, something that will not translate well into public language. You carry it quietly, aware that it will likely fade beneath louder accounts, but content to have felt it nonetheless. As you continue moving, you notice how others seem to share this same subdued awareness. Faces appear thoughtful rather than animated. Expressions shaped by inward reflection rather than outward excitement. No one speaks of what this night will mean. There is no attempt to claim ownership of its outcome. The absence of such claims feels significant. It suggests an understanding, however unspoken, that meaning is already slipping beyond individual grasp, being gathered up by forces larger and more distant. The palace grows quieter still, if that is possible. Even the occasional sounds of movement diminish, replaced by long stretches of near total silence. It feels as though the building is emptying itself of presence, preparing to return to its habitual solitude. You sense that remaining here much longer would change nothing, add nothing. The night has given all it will within these walls. Whatever follows will unfold elsewhere, carried by voices that did not stand on cold stone floors or listen for sounds that never came. You feel a gentle pull toward departure, not as an instruction, but as a natural conclusion to your presence here. The realization that the myth is beginning elsewhere makes staying feel unnecessary. This place has already done its part by refusing to dramatize itself. It has offered only reality, unadorned and unresolved. You understand that this refusal will not survive intact once the night is translated into story. Simplicity rarely does. As you move toward darker corridors, leading away from the grand spaces, you carry with you the quiet certainty that what you experienced will soon be overshadowed by what is said about it. The silence you stood inside will be replaced by louder, cleaner versions of events. Standing here now, you accept that distinction without protest. History, you realize, does not require your agreement to proceed. It only requires that you were here, briefly, within these rooms, breathing cold air and witnessing how easily reality gives way to narrative once the night begins to lift and the myth finds its voice somewhere far beyond these silent walls. You do not remember deciding to leave. At some point, standing inside the palace simply stops feeling necessary, and that is enough. Your body begins to move with the same quiet logic that carried you in, following corridors that now feel familiar in their emptiness. The walls no longer impress or confuse you. They are just boundaries guiding your steps back toward air that smells less like dust and more like night. The echoes follow you for a while, then thin out, as though even they know there is nothing left to repeat. The transition from interior to threshold happens gradually. The palace loosens its hold in small stages, releasing you from deep rooms into wider passages, from polished floors to stone that carries faint traces of dampness. The air shifts again, growing sharper, colder, carrying hints of the river and coal smoke that feel almost comforting in their familiarity. You pause briefly near an exit, not out of hesitation, but because the contrast is noticeable. Inside was suspension. Outside promises continuation, even if that continuation lacks clarity. When you step back into the open night, the cold meets you fully. It presses against your face and hands, immediate and honest. Your breath clouds more visibly now, hanging in front of you for a moment before dissolving. The city receives you without ceremony. There is no crowd waiting, no sound rising to mark your return. Streets stretch out much as they did earlier, quiet but not empty, carrying the low, steady hum of life, resuming its ordinary rhythm. You walk slowly, allowing space to form between yourself and the palace behind you. It recedes into the darkness with surprising ease, its pale mass blending back into the night until it feels less like a place you occupied and more like something you passed through. You do not look back often. There is nothing there asking to be reconsidered. Whatever happened inside has already settled into stillness, and the city does not seem interested in retrieving it. Around you, Petrograd continues, in small, unremarkable ways. A door closes somewhere down the street. Footsteps approach and pass without comment. A distant voice carries briefly, then fades. These sounds feel grounding, reminders that the world has not paused for this night alone. You blend back into it easily. Another figure, moving through cold air. Coat pulled tight, head lowered against the wind. The anonymity feels natural, even welcome. As you walk, you search instinctively for a sense of ending. You test the idea quietly, wondering if there should be a moment where the night resolves itself, where meaning settles clearly into place. Nothing like that arrives. The city offers no conclusion. It simply continues, indifferent to whether you feel finished or not. The absence of resolution does not trouble you as much as you might have expected. It feels consistent with everything that came before. Your body carries the night forward in small ways. Fatigue remains, settled deep but manageable. Your legs move steadily, warmed slightly now by motion. The cold no longer creeps upward so insistently. It surrounds you instead, a constant presence rather than an advancing one. You notice how your thoughts have grown quieter, less inclined to search for explanations. Experience has flattened into sensation. Walking, breathing, listening. You pass buildings whose windows glow faintly, suggesting lives unfolding behind glass. Somewhere, people sit and talk, eat, sleep, argue, plan for tomorrow. The knowledge does not feel distant, it feels adjacent, as though you could step sideways into any of it without difficulty. Whatever significance the palace once held seems to diminish with each step you take away from it. not because it was unimportant, but because it no longer occupies your immediate world. There is no sense of triumph accompanying this departure, nor is there disappointment sharp enough to linger. What you feel instead is a muted neutrality, a calm acceptance that this night will not provide a clean ending. You have not reached a point of closure. You have simply moved on. The distinction feels subtle but important. Closure implies understanding. Moving on requires only motion. The streets guide you without asking questions. You follow their familiar logic, turning where turns feel natural, stopping briefly when your body asks for it. The fog drifts low again near the river, softening edges and muting sound. Lamps cast uneven pools of light that you step through, one by one, your shadow stretching and shrinking without significance. The city does not frame your presence as noteworthy. It absorbs you the way it absorbs everyone else. As you continue, you realize that leaving without resolution is not a failure of the night, but its most honest outcome. Events like this rarely conclude neatly for those inside them. Endings are constructed later with distance and hindsight. Walking here now, you carry no such distance. You carry only what you felt. Cold floors, quiet rooms, waiting without instruction, movement without climax. These impressions remain loosely connected, resisting assembly into a single meaning. Your breathing steadies into an easy rhythm, no longer shaped by stillness or anticipation. The city gives you back a sense of forward flow, even if you do not know where it leads. Somewhere ahead, the night will thin into morning. People will wake and speak and begin arranging words around what happened. You will hear those words later, perhaps, and recognize only fragments of what you experienced inside them. For now, you keep walking. The palace fades fully from view. The cold air sharpens your awareness, just enough to keep you present. There is no clear ending to mark, no moment to seal the night away. There is only departure, quiet and unremarkable, and the soft continuation of the city around you, carrying you forward without asking what you think it all meant. By the time the night loosens its grip on you, it no longer feels like something you're inside of. It feels like something you are carrying. The city stretches ahead in quiet familiarity, streets unfolding without drama, each step easing you farther from the palace and closer to the ordinary rhythms that never truly stopped. Your body moves almost on its own now, guided by habit rather than intention. The cold still surrounds you, but it has softened into something manageable, no longer sharp enough to demand attention. What lingers more strongly is a gentle weight behind your eyes, a tiredness that feels earned rather than imposed. As you walk, the night begins to compress. Details that once felt expansive shrink into fragments. The echo of a corridor, the chill of stone, the emptiness of rooms too large for the moment they held. These impressions no longer arrive all at once. They surface slowly, one at a time, like objects uncovered in low light. You do not attempt to organize them. There is no need. They arrange themselves naturally, settling into memory without asking to be explained. You notice how quickly the scale of it all diminishes once you're outside it. The palace, which seemed endless from within, now exists only as a pale shape somewhere behind you, already blending into the city's background. The vast rooms contract into the idea of rooms. The silence condenses into a general quiet. The night that felt suspended and unresolving now becomes just a night, one among many, distinguished only by the way it refuses to sharpen itself into a clear narrative. Your thoughts drift gently, not toward conclusions, but toward recognition. This is how experience often behaves when removed from its setting. It loses grandeur without losing truth. It becomes portable, something you can carry forward without effort. The night does not demand remembrance. It allows itself to be remembered imperfectly, in softened outlines rather than precise detail. Somewhere ahead, the sky begins to shift almost imperceptibly. darkness thins, not enough to suggest dawn, but enough to signal that time continues, regardless of meaning. You feel no urgency to reach morning. The hours ahead belong to others now, to voices that will interpret and explain, to movements that will claim significance. Your part in that process has already ended. What remains is this quiet passage through the city, your breath steady, your steps unremarkable. You realize that nothing you experienced insists on being called a turning point. There was no single moment that demanded recognition, no instant where everything aligned and declared itself important. Instead, the night unfolded sideways, through pauses and absences, through spaces where nothing happened loudly enough to be certain. From the inside, history felt diffuse, hesitant, unfinished. That sensation stays with you, a reminder that events rarely arrive with labels attached. The city accepts you fully now. Familiar landmarks reappear, stripped of any association with what just occurred. A bridge spans the river, as it always has. A corner shop stands closed, its sign dark. Windows glow faintly in residential buildings, offering glimpses of lives untouched by the palace's silence. You move among these things without friction, aware of how easily the extraordinary dissolves back into the everyday once distance is introduced. Your body responds to this return by relaxing further. Muscles loosen, shoulders drop. The tension that once kept you alert fades completely. What remains is a low, steady fatigue that suggests rest rather than reflection. You do not feel compelled to replay the night in your mind. There is no urgency to preserve it intact. Memory will do what it does best: simplify, soften, and store what matters without consulting you. You think briefly of how this night will be remembered by others. The images will grow sharper as the reality grows duller. Words will be chosen that imply clarity and momentum. The waiting will be shortened, the stillness will be smoothed over. What felt small and uncertain will be expanded into something decisive. Standing here now, you understand that this transformation is not deception so much as necessity. Large stories cannot survive intact if they carry too much quiet. And yet, the smaller version you carry feels no less real for its lack of drama. It feels honest. It reflects the texture of lived experience. The cold that crept upward from stone floors. The voices that never quite gathered force. The realization that power had already moved on before you arrived. These details do not lend themselves to slogans or speeches. They exist instead as sensations, subtle and persistent, shaping how you understand not just this night, but others like it. As you continue walking, the night settles fully into the past tense. You do not mark the moment when it happens. There is no threshold, no signal. One step simply follows another until the palace no longer occupies any part of your immediate awareness. What remains is a quiet understanding that being present inside history often feels like this: muted, ambiguous, stripped of spectacle. The grandeur comes later, applied from a distance. You carry the night with you not as proof of participation, but as a private reference point. It reminds you that history, when lived, is rarely loud enough to justify its reputation. It is made of standing and waiting and listening for things that never quite arrive. It is shaped by fatigue and confusion as much as by intention. From the inside, it often feels smaller, narrower, less certain than the versions that endure. The city continues to open ahead of you, offering no commentary, no summary. It simply allows you to move forward, one quiet step at a time. The cold air clears your thoughts just enough to keep you present. The memory of the night settles gently, already beginning to fade at the edges. You do not resist this. Some experiences are not meant to remain sharp. By the time you slow your pace, by the time the idea of rest becomes unavoidable, the night has fully transformed into memory. It rests there lightly, no longer demanding attention. You understand then that this is how most of history lives on, not as a thunderous turning point, but as a quiet impression carried forward by those who were there, knowing that from the inside it felt smaller, quieter, and far less certain than anyone would ever believe. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.